Welcome, Jeanne, to Polyphonic Voices. I'm so glad you were here to join us today as we use this opportunity to introduce the greater Atlanta community to musicians who live among us and early musicians who are near and dear to us here in Atlanta. So, first of all, welcome and thank you for agreeing to be interviewed for this series today.
Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, so am I, and I'm interested to see what all wonderful things we'll find out about you. So just this morning, I was thinking myself, the question often comes up, well, how did you learn about the recorder? How did you learn about this? So my question for you is, how did your life as a musician begin?
Well, my mom is actually a fantastic pianist and still is. And as a young child, I loved sneaking into the living room under her Steinway grand and just lying there in the wash of sound. And it just blew me away. And she found out I was doing that after a while and was concerned about my hearing.
Oh,
So she asked me not to because it was very loud.
okay.
But I would still sneak in because I loved it and I loved hearing the excitement and the drive and the energy in the music that she played. And she taught privately in our home. So I think I was about 4 when I asked her if I could start taking lessons with her. So I played piano and violin both for 10 years. The violin story is rather humorous because my mom had played violin in a music ed instrument class where you just try all the different instrument groups. And she loved how it was so close to the body, like you were hugging it.
Oh,
So I sort of play violin because she loved it and had a friend who was teaching the Suzuki method. And I remember her asking me, I still remember it was a Saturday and we were having lunch and I was about 5 and I was very cranky that day. And she asked if I would like to try violin. And I really wanted to say no, but it sounded pretty cool to me. So that's actually how I started. And then when I was 15, I was practicing 2 hours a day by then on violin. I just couldn't keep both instruments going. So I had to choose. And I am today a very horrid pianist. Unfortunately, I lost most of those skills.
well, I can understand those skills left me very quickly too after I studied harpsichord a little bit in college, and now I can look at harpsichord music and regret that I can't play it a little better. So, well, that's very interesting that the violin was sort of the carrot at the end of the stick for you as a child. So many children they're searching for so many other things to keep them entertained. So what throughout like high school were you in your school orchestra or did you study privately only? How did you progress through your early years and your teenage years?
Uh, Truthfully, I was not in my group. I lived in the Metro Chicago area primarily growing up. I wasn't in the school orchestra then just because I played so long and it sort of wasn't appropriate to be starting out playing
Mhm.
Twinkle. I was already playing concertos. But I did, we moved to Wisconsin my junior year to Appleton, where Lawrence University is. And we had a fantastic orchestra director. And I played both violin and kind of faked viola in the orchestra there. Um, and in the summers, I went to Interlochen Arts Camp in Michigan. And that is a big reason why I'm a musician. I just, it was really an awakening for me being there with amazing conductors, amazing musician friends from all around the world playing in an auditorium that was surrounded by nature and trees and lakes and birds. Um, and I really saw different aspects of music, I think, from that experience.
And where in that timeline did you discover that Baroque music or early music was actually a thing, or did you ever have that moment of epiphany?
Uh, I had a couple. I loved Renaissance festivals in high school, which were very popular at the time. And I realized how much I loved that music. And I remember getting some actually vinyl albums in the day of that music and just loving it. and loving that era. And I didn't really think much about it until I was at IU, and I had friends in Stanley Ritchie's Baroque Orchestra, which was in its early years, and actually still looking for people to be in the group. Times have
So,
certainly changed.
so sorry to interrupt, but so you started IU not necessarily emphasizing early music, but just as a violin player.
Yes, actually, my two degrees are in modern violin performance.
Okay.
Although I studied Baroque
Mhm.
quite a bit in both at both schools, but it was so fascinating and interesting to me, and the program was very intense, where we had private lessons in chamber music and orchestra all
Mhm.
at once. So I learned quite a bit there, and I really loved it. And I actually didn't really have an opportunity to pursue it professionally here in Atlanta until I was around 30,
Mhm.
and I bought a Baroque violin and got back into it. And I think I had an epiphany like 5 years later that, oh, I'm really a Baroque violinist. And I was telling all my friends, and they were like, duh. So it
Oh,
was funny, but I still play both. I can't not play Brahms or Prokofiev ever again. So I sort of do half and half, which I enjoy.
okay. And this is jumping ahead a little bit, but now that you bring up that you started your studies as a contemporary musician, and then eventually sort of worked your way in a circle back to the Baroque era. At During that time, and through all your training, do you find it equally comfortable to play both? Do you have to stop and reset yourself to change style periods, performance practice techniques?
I used to struggle with that a little bit because I tended to play one instrument for a long stretch, like
Hmm.
a few months, and then I'd have a bunch of work with another instrument. And I learned I would just panic the first day I played the other instrument as
Hmm.
I sounded really bad. And I realized I needed about 2 days of debriefing, uh,
Oh,
and then I would be in the groove again. Um, Somehow that hasn't affected me much over the last maybe 3 years. I've been performing more, and I've been performing quite a bit on both.
okay.
Uh, so surprisingly, I found I can go between pretty well.
Okay. Very nice. That's always interesting to me because I know I struggle, have my own little internal struggle when I move between contemporary and early music, because even as a recorder player, I really love contemporary music because the thought of perpetuating repertoire and such for the instrument is important to me. But I do know that m- making my sound more appropriate for historical performance. I mean, I like you said, a debriefing is still necessary for me. So I'm quite impressed. So during your time of study, in your college study, who were your influential teachers, and how did they help push you, whether knowingly or not, more toward early music?
Um, my modern violin teacher was James Buswell, and he was very open to the whole concept, which was still kind of new in universities in the late 80s. And I remember I was working on the Bach B minor unaccompanied partita, and I was wondering about a double dotting question in the first movement. And he said, you know, let's go upstairs. So we literally knocked on Stanley Ritchie's door and asked him before I was studying with him, and had the information source right there. So he was very, very open to that, and taught some of those concepts on modern violin, being sensitive to decay and things like that, and a little different tone and articulation than you use for Tchaikovsky, for instance.
Okay.
Um, Several of his students, like David Greenberg, a friend of mine, went on to be in groups like Temple Music, uh, pursued Baroque violin solely sometimes.
Hmm.
So um, that steered me towards it as well. And really, my only Baroque teacher was Stanley Ritchie. I'll say, because I still learn from him to this day. So he influenced me the most with that. Just concepts of gesture and weighting notes different ways. And he used to say every measure, every piece is in one. and use his concepts every single day.
Oh, well, that's good to know. And I hear lots of people, string players and not, refer back to Stanley Ritchie as having been a very important influence in their musical life. What particularly brought you to the Atlanta area?
A car accident. My family was in Wisconsin at the time. I finished my master's degree, and about 2 months later was in a car wreck that unfortunately broke my left hand in 3 places. And wasn't, I couldn't hold a glass or anything when I got out of the cast, so I wasn't really sure I could be a professional violinist after all that work. Um, my family moved here to Atlanta, and I went along with them. I figured I could get good physical therapy and maybe freelance in a large place like this and see where I stood. Um, and I only plan to stay, a year or two and hopefully, get a job somewhere else. But I ended up staying for a number of reasons and happily healed and could follow my path with music.
Okay, so you've been in Atlanta, I guess a number of years. What year did you move here?
1990.
Okay, so you predate me only by a couple of years here. How have you seen the early music scene, particularly in Atlanta, change?
Um, there wasn't really much at all when I first moved here. And when I was teaching at Clayton State University, directing the orchestra there and working with Lyle Nordstrom, he was very, very instrumental, no pun intended, in really pulling together all the forces here that had any early music background. And the Atlanta Baroque Orchestra, I was one of the founding members of that. And in some ways, it started out partially as a training orchestra for some modern players who were interested in learning the Baroque style. And so Stanley Ritchie actually came and did some workshops and concertos with us. And that's really, really grown and evolved over the years. And other groups like Trinity Baroque have, sprung up quite a while ago. So um, I have found it to be growing and continuing in um, quality and uh, quality and bringing people from out of town as well. And I have still done quite a bit of the Baroque work outside in other states, actually.
Okay.
So,
So yeah, I guess I've always thought of Atlanta as being sort of a consistent but slow and steady community. People here are very supportive. I see a very once again a consistent audience who tends to come to concerts and support everybody.
yes, very.
And we're certainly grateful for those people because not only do they show up, they tend to love early music and proselytize for us so well around here that it's not the professional musicians, I think, that drum up the business around here. I really think it's our supportive audience members who many of them themselves are amateur musicians. So and I will tell you right now, I'm grateful for what you helped bring about with the Atlanta Baroque Orchestra and such. I remember when that was being formed, and that was probably around that time is when I first learned of you. So so all of us can be grateful for the whatever contribution you had during the early '90s when all of that came about.
Well, thank you.
So on your website, Jeanne, I see that you list that you're a soloist, a chamber musician, and an orchestra musician. Out of those three performance media, how do you feel about each one? Do you have one that you prefer over another, or is there one that you feel seems to reflect you the best?
I love all three, the different aspects of all three. Um, I probably feel freest when I get to do Baroque violin and continuo
Okay.
things with ornamentation and being able to be spontaneous in the moment with timing. And so it has the wonderful chamber music response to each other, as well as just so much freedom, particularly in some of the really early works. Bieber, Pandolfi, Schmelzer, Walter, I think those are my favorites. Because there's so much improvisatory writing, and then you can add your own. And it's really freeing. I love the chamber music give and take. I also just love the orchestral repertoire, Baroque and modern, and sitting maybe from my sitting under the piano days, just being engulfed in the sound of the whole orchestra and feeling the amplification of that group energy. There are times when you can just feel, almost feel a click when everyone has just aligned and we're just riding a wave with the piece, with the energy and emotion and excitement of it. And it's so intense when there are 80 or 100 people on stage. It's just fantastic. So I enjoy all three.
Well, very good. So when do you when you perform solo works, do you tend to schedule solo recitals, or what solo opportunities do you have to play your music?
Um, I have done recitals on series around the country, and my group music of the Spheres with Joanna Blendorf on cello and gamba and Yuko Tanaka on harpsichord. We have played at a number of series around the country, and got a chance to play in Germany as well, which was fantastic. And so we have mostly presented on series that already exist. I don't really do much self-presenting anymore, but I used to do a lot of that when I was younger here in Atlanta.
Okay. And when you were doing self-presenting, what did you run into difficulties with it? Were the administrative tasks um, sort of not worth the return of doing a concert? What did you run into with that?
I found a lot of musicians have found that it's hard to get a large turnout for chamber concerts
Hmm.
here unless they're on an established series, perhaps at a church or university. And it's hard to publicize. It's a little easier now in the days of um, social media and everything, but it was difficult to do all of that and get the performing ready and try to get enough people to know about it. Um, so yeah, it's a challenge.
Oh, yeah, I can totally relate to that as my own Baroque ensemble's in its second year, and we'll have one concert that's fairly well attended, and the next one will be very tiny, and you just don't know what you did that's right or wrong, but it can be unpredictable. And so your group Music of the Spheres, how did the three of you meet?
Well, like most of the best things in life, it just started with synchronicities. I actually met Yuko because we were the first two people at the welcoming spaghetti dinner at the Carmel Bach Festival. We were the only two that arrived on time. So we started talking and we decided to sight read together, and thought it would be fun to play together in the future. And meanwhile, I had met Joanna at the Bloomington Early Music Festival and was really impressed with her playing as well, and we did some chamber music there. So we decided to do a fringe concert at the Berkeley Early Music Festival in 2000, and that was how we started.
Wow, I did not know. I did a fringe concert in 2000 also at the
You
Berkeley.
did?
I did.
Oh,
Oh, wow, that's amazing. How often do you guys get together and rehearse?
well, we're in three different states, and when we started the group, they both lived in the Bay Area, and I was out there quite often playing with Philharmonia Baroque Orchestra, so it worked out pretty well. But it, we would usually meet in California and rehearse, and a lot of our new programs we performed first in California on the San Francisco Early Music Society series. We were fortunate to do a main stage concert at the Berkeley Festival in 2002. So we would just have a week preparing and perform, and then we could just have a couple days rehearsal if we met in New York or Germany or wherever else to put the program together.
Okay.
And yeah,
Is Yuko still in the Bay Area?
yes.
Okay, because I know Joanna moved down here somewhere in Alabama, in Huntsville.
Briefly, as she is now on the faculty at Indiana University in the Early
Okay.
Music Institute,
Oh, so she
to
moved to New.
Bloomington.
Okay, so and with this group, do you ever perform with other musicians? Do you keep it just with the three of you?
In fact, we had a wonderful concert in Indianapolis with Mark Sudik and Stanley Ritchie played with us. We did some three violin works, and uh, Elizabeth Wright actually filled in for our harpsichordist who had a little injury right then. And we actually gave an award to Stanley, and I got to present it and give a speech, which was really meaningful to me. So, yeah, we have sometimes done that with guitar and extra violins.
Okay. And tell me about your Germany concert. You've done one international concert with this group. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes, that was probably one of the highlights of my whole musical career. We performed at the Taga Alter Music Festival in Regensburg, and we we were one of the only, possibly the only group that got to perform in an old um, sort of government hall from the 1300s, an incredible historic building, and women had not been allowed in it, and our group is three women, so that was kind of neat to be able
Oh,
to do. And it was just an amazing experience, an amazingly enthusiastic crowd, and incredible groups for the whole week. Beautiful town. It was really, really, really special.
wow, that sounds wonderful. And what about let's talk about your modern performing career. I've noticed that you've toured with Vince Gill and Amy Grant or performed with them. Tell us a little bit about what that side of your life is like.
uh, yeah, that side kind of runs the gamut. I have done 2 month-long tours with Vince and Amy, which were incredibly fun. I played with the Nashville Chamber Orchestra for a number of years, which did everything from gypsy jazz with John Jorgensen. Turtle Island Quartet had a residence with us. We did a tango concert with dancers from Argentina. We had so much interesting programming, and I really enjoyed that. And then, I've just done a lot of symphony work, chamber chamber concerts.
Okay. And all of that's extremely interesting. And of course, I know you've played with the Atlanta Baroque Orchestra. Like you said earlier, you were one of the founding members. And I also see you have a very impressive list of other historical orchestras you've performed with. Tell us a little about those.
A lot of my work was with Philharmonia. Another highlight of my career was taking a Topple music tour on a week's notice, substituting for somebody to Europe for 3.5 weeks, to 8 different countries, including Slovenia and Portugal. And that was just a fantastic trip. We got to play in the Music Verein and the Barbican, and just some really special experiences there. I got to visit Figaro House, where Mozart wrote Marriage of Figaro, and to stand in the same place where he was probably writing this amazing work. It was a really moving trip, and I would get up early every morning before the bus left and run out and sightsee as much as I could in 2 hours before I had to get back to catch the bus to go to the new place. So it was a fantastic experience.
Wow, that does sound just amazing. And you said only a couple of weeks notice?
Literally a week, if that.
Okay.
Uh, yes. So I fortunately had a current passport, and I think I had to buy a big suitcase, and I hit the road.
Okay, I think for that opportunity, I would buy a large suitcase myself without hesitating. So, wow, that just sounds wonderful.
It was.
Well, so I noticed on your website too that you have a few sound samples, and it was really hard to move away from the page even after I was finished reading a few things on your page because the music, as I was listening, the best analogy I could come up with is it just sounded like your violin was full of this ethereal music, and somehow you made that music come out because I just don't understand how you sound so effortless when you play. And I think maybe I could technically break down a couple of things in that you said that Stanley Ritchie really talked about the decay of a note and the release of a note. And my goodness, that was the first thing I noticed is just how sensitive both your attacks and releases are. How do you get such a sound out of your instrument, and what inspires you to do that?
Well, first, thank you so much. That's so kind of you. Um, I really enjoy the level of detail in preparing works like that. And I think more of that happens in Baroque groups and in Baroque orchestras, particularly, just a nuance and great attention to attack, decay, gesture, weighting the notes, throwing away certain notes. So I do work on that to some detail. Um, I think, though, what I most enjoy is finding what I call the organic emotional skeleton of a piece. Sometimes you'll be faced with, 3 pages of 30-second notes in a Bieber sonata, and you have to find some phrasing, the sentences and paragraphs throughout that. And so a lot of the choices I make musically are based on that, but I never feel like I'm really complete with a piece until I've found that skeleton for myself. I remember working on a beautiful Bieber sonata a couple years ago, and I just couldn't find a way to make sense of some of these run-on 30-second passages. And I finally came up with an image of a forest. Most of those early works, as you know, have a lot of disjunct sections that are strung together. So you have to find a way to make it cohesive. And I just pictured this forest and dawn and birds, and then at some point a wedding band came through, a fiddle band, and sunset and crickets and the moon rising. And I just feel my hair stand on end when I've found the right story for me. And then it's all cohesive, and then I make my choices actually based on that, because sometimes I might be imitating birds, or I might be imitating leaves rustling. And I love that programmatic aspect, or at least an emotional journey aspect. And that will be how I make those choices: articulation, dynamics, movement, flow.
And what is the process by which you start the story? But because I will tell you right now, I have a lot of my own students who can't understand a piece, and I'm not surprised to hear that you put a story with the music, because I personally feel like every piece of music is up for interpretation, and you can't tell the listener what they should be thinking in the music, but I think they can certainly tell if you're not creating a story in your music. So how do you exactly begin that process? What is the starting point for you at there?
It's really just imagination. I sort of create a space to be inspired. Never really thought about this. And for instance, I remember Pandolfi's sonata that was just had a very still opening, and it made me think of a quiet, cold evening and stars for some reason, stars in the sky. And other parts might remind me of a battle, or overcoming something, or ruminating. A lot of the Bach preludes and the unaccompanied works, and even the D minor Allemande, sound like someone ruminating to me. It's the rhythm of how we ruminate and turn something over in our minds, or process emotion, or someone pacing around trying to solve something. So that's not as much of a story, but it just comes to me from the music, and I guess from my own experiences I've had in life as well.
Have you ever performed a solo work and had your story in mind, and then listened to it later and thought, boy, I just don't like my story. I really think this is about something else. Have you ever been in that position?
No, actually, I haven't, to be honest. There are many things about past recordings I will cringe at later. But the story I usually feel good about, and what's been really cool, is that sometimes people have come up to me afterwards and said, I don't know why, but I just pictured this forest in this part that you were playing, and this whole image, and it was exactly what I had in my mind. So it's fascinating how that can be transmitted.
Well, getting back to like I said, I heard these recordings, and you were singing through this instrument. There was this delicate feel to everything you did, even in the fastest of passages. Nothing ever felt aggressive. Everything just felt like it was a gesture, even if it were a gesture that was composed of many, 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 many notes. So during that, you said you're detail oriented. How which details do you work on that you think are important? And are there details that sometimes others work on that you think probably musicians spend too much time bogged down with?
Um, I don't know the answer to the second question so much. Nothing comes to mind particularly, but um, the flow is, in great part to Stanley Ritchie, gratitude to Stanley Ritchie, with the concept of a gesture and a direction and thinking of much longer lines and groupings
Hmm.
of notes. I view them, I do a little painting, and my trees always looked horrible. And my teacher told me, you need to just look at where the spaces of the sky are between the leaves and make the shapes. And then you can have a few in the light that are more accented.
Okay.
Because if you make every leaf accented, it looks, you know, like a 3-year-old drew it. And I use that as an example with my students. I'm looking at the trees out my window right now. Uh, the notes are kind of like the leaves. They're usually part of a much larger shape that we're making, and they fulfill a function in that shape that we need to follow. So if there's anything I hear sometimes in performances, it's that there are sometimes it can get too beaty
Hmm.
instead of being a long flowing sentence and having a direction to it. I think phrases sort of have a goal and a trailing off that I
Okay.
look for, that hierarchy.
Okay. And you obviously seem inspired by music enough that you're able to transmit that inspiration through your playing. How do you feel that, first of all, other performances have inspired you, and how do you um, I guess how do you fulfill your role of inspiring others through your playing?
I feel like I am a lightning rod when I play. And I feel like I'm opening myself up as a vessel to a much larger energy that courses through me like a river. And if, as you so kindly said, it does seem effortless sounding when I play, it's not, but it's because that energy is flowing through me and I'm riding it. And things just fall into place when we do that. And the performances I've been inspired by are when people are in that vein. They're riding this huge energy that we almost couldn't contain in our own bodies or in the little contact point of the bow on the string. It's something coursing through us that's coming out that way. So I don't even usually think about, I don't even feel like I have arms when I play anymore. I'm just in this abstract energy space. And I've consciously worked on that. I had my first experience playing in the zone when I was 15. A teacher, my violin teacher, gave me the inner game of tennis, which was fantastic um, for opening me up to getting my brain out of the way and getting into that sort of probably alpha wave, quiet awareness. Um, and I was hooked. It was amazing. And so I spent all of college and my early professional years trying to create that at will. Um, and I can usually be in that space now when I play through many decades of practice. And I remember, so I've been inspired by performances where people are riding that wave, and it's just almost inevitable, like a tidal wave, and it's so exciting. And the whole hall, the whole auditorium, audience, everyone playing is aligned in one energy together, and it's just thrilling. And I remember an experience I had here in Atlanta. I was playing a concert with a wonderful chamber group I played with called Mary Band, probably in the mid 90s. And it was one of those apocalyptic thunderstorm days in Atlanta where streets were flooding, lightning was hitting everything. It was incredibly windy. It was just a disaster. And I had to drive from Roswell to the La Vista area on a Friday night. And so it was just, apocalyptic traffic. It was just a mess. And even though playing a concert like that is my favorite thing to do in the world, I didn't want to go. It was such a mess. And I was sure that nobody was going to want to be out that night. It was just dangerous and awful. And I got there and we had a full audience, and most of the tickets to that concert were sold at the door, not ahead of time. And I looked out at everybody, dripping wet, and I was so moved that they thought that we had something to say that was worth coming out in that mess and going through that. And I saw, it's checking me out to think of it, but I saw a woman with a turban on that looked like she had been going through chemo. And I just looked out there and I wondered, how many people had just lost someone they loved, or were going through some hardship, or just learned that they had cancer, or just lost a child, going through a divorce. We walk past people every day and we don't know what they're experiencing inside. And I was just moved to tears by it. And I felt like I wanted to be a vessel for this larger energy in a spiritual way, to have that flow through me and be a healing factor for people. I feel like musicians are really kind of a priests and therapists for our society, whether it's processing grief, commemorating an event like, I shouldn't say commemorating, but grieving an event like 9/11, celebrating an event like a wedding. People during this coronavirus time are turning to music so much to soothe and express. And sitting in an audience in a hushed, dark theater is an anonymous, individual, intense experience it's safe because it's anonymous. And the music just touches a vein of feeling in us that's so far beyond anything words can express. It can just touch an old wound and open it up, and we can just start crying, unexpectedly out of the blue. Or we can feel inspired and excited to go do something we didn't feel we could do, feel confident, or feel hopeful. It can show us the possibility of what the world can be as well, or what our own lives can be. And I just dedicated myself in that moment to being that vessel for the rest of my life, and even sending love to my audiences before I show up, weeks before I show up at the concert, and trying to use the piece I'm playing to evoke that kind of catharsis, and it's cathartic for me as well.
Wow, I have a friend who he's a little binary in the way he refers to things. He calls people takers or givers, and it just I just felt like in your explanation of this that in that moment in a concert hearing music, every one of us gets to be a taker without guilt. That's our time to sort of recharge and perhaps get that inspiration in order to be a giver in life, which I think so many musicians naturally are anyway. We're givers. So that's beautiful the way you express that, because I can totally see sitting in an anonymous setting of just listening to music and taking it all in, being able to be a taker that whole time and using it to recharge. That's just a wonderful way that you put that there. What would you like to what would you like the end of COVID to look like for you as a musician? How would you like the musical world to reopen when all of this is over?
Well, I hope that we'll be able to return one day to concerts as we have them. Like a lot of people, I've been researching the 1918 epidemic a little bit, which ended and became more and more dilute, and ended on its own without even a vaccine. And people went back to doing the things they used to do. So I hope that we can have that. I think it will be an ecstatically joyous and tearful opportunity when we all get to play and listen to our first concerts. And I have to say, I think audience members are givers also, because you can't give a gift unless someone receives it. And we're all creating it together. They're part of the creation of what's happening, and part of the emotion and the process and the energy in the room. So, and audiences give so much to us performers and validate and value what we do.
Oh, absolutely. And by no means did I mean that the audience is selfish and not part of the process. I just love the thought of being able to sit there and just take in everything and just recharge yourself to make one more able to make us more able to give to others. Um, so who have you always wished to play with that you have not gotten to play with yet, or what repertoire are you still waiting to get a chance to play?
um, I love Spanish and Latin American Baroque music. I may have an opportunity to play some Latin American Baroque in Colombia, um, South America, but who knows now? So I'm hoping that will still come to pass. It sounds wonderful. Um, well, if I could have a fantasy list of who I could play with,
Oh, absolutely. Why not?
probably Andrew Manzi and Rachel Podger would be on the top
Okay.
of that list. And I've been fortunate to play with some people on my fantasy list like Joanna and Yuko. They're just amazing. My friend Jin Kim, an amazing Baroque violinist. I've gotten to play with Stanley Ritchie and Elizabeth Wright, my teachers, which was such an honor and a thrill. So I've been fortunate in that way for sure.
Wow, and I can totally understand that because I think all of us eventually get to the point we play with somebody and think, wow, 10 years ago I could never have imagined this is what I would get to do in this moment. So I totally understand that feeling. And but I also know that all over the place people listen to you play and you have to be the dream person to play with. I know
Oh,
you have to be that person for many people.
that's so sweet. Thank
Oh,
you.
well, Jeanne, this has been a wonderful time to chat with you. I'm glad that you shared more about you than I knew personally, and I hope that everyone who's able to view this interview, I hope that they also have gained something from this, and that they now are more interested in seeking out your performances and in hearing what you have to offer, not just in your recordings that we can access now, but hopefully we now have our own carrot at the end of the stick to hear you live sooner rather than later.
Oh, thank you so much.
Well, Jeanne, you have a great day, and once again I thank you, and we'll look forward to the end of this so that we can see more of you in person.
Thank you so much. We will all look forward to that day.
Okay, goodbye, Jeanne.
Goodbye. Thank you.